Welcome everybody to the APWA Monterey Bay Chapter Quick Build Projects program. My name is Debbie Hale, and I'm the Executive Director of the Transportation Agency for Monterey County, which is sponsoring this webinar. We've got almost 60 people on the line here, so we're going to keep everybody muted. If you have anything that you would like to ask, we'll be taking questions at the end, or you can send me something in the chat box. You can send it to everyone if you'd like, that way the speakers will see it. So in order to get a little bit of a sense as to who's on the line, we've got a poll up. Thank you. Most of you have taken the chance to vote. I'm not sure how you vote if you're on the phone, so probably not able to do that. So our format today is going to be, we've got two fabulous award-winning speakers from the Transportation Agency for Monterey County who are going to talk about quick build projects and how you can do them in your town and make local streets safer for your citizens. And then we'll have questions and answers afterwards, and we will get you out of here before 12:30, perhaps even a little bit earlier. So I'd like to start by let's see, well, as we wait for people, I'd like to start by introducing our fabulous panelists. So Ariana Green is a senior transportation planner with the Transportation Agency for Monterey County. She's our Safe Routes to School manager and also oversees our Go 831 trip reduction program. She was recently voted Young Professional of the Year for the Monterey Bay Chapter because of her fabulous job. And I'm sure she would have been in the running for Young Professional of the Year nationally if she'd have been in APWA a little bit longer. Our second panelist is Rich Deal. He's a traffic engineer and has many more initials after his name than I remember. He works also for the Transportation Agency for Monterey County and worked for the City of Monterey for many years. He won the APWA Excellence in Safety Award last year at the national level. And he is also on the Transportation Research Board Roundabout Committee and is somebody who both regionally and nationally provides advice on innovative traffic engineering solutions. So I hope you will join me in welcoming our panelists. And I'm going to go ahead and, oh, looks like people have discovered the second poll. Okay, so we have 65 out of 79 people who have responded to our poll, and I believe that you all can see online, but I'm going to end the poll and just share the results. So we have 23 people from the Monterey Bay and 42 people from other places in California. Oh, and we got one person from the Midwest and one person from elsewhere in the US. So that's fantastic. Most of you are engineers, but we got a few planners, and I put an executive manager because we don't have the same kind of education always. And then other, which I'm very curious about. So that gives us a little bit of background on you, and I've given you a little bit of background on us. And so now I would like to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists. So Ariana, I will go ahead and I think you can unmute yourself.
Great, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So today we're going to talk about how we can use quick build projects to adapt our streets to better accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians to more quickly meet our Vision Zero goals for those of you who have communities that have set have a Vision Zero policy. And then we've also expanded our presentation to talk about some other types of temporary streets that can be implemented to help our communities stay safe during this time of pandemic. And my screen is frozen, of course. Let me try stop sharing and then reshare. Bear with me, folks.
Looks like we're up to 84 participants on the line, so that's fantastic. And it looks like Ariana's screen is back.
Great. Okay. There we go. Awesome. So before we launch into the presentation, I just wanted to call out that although COVID-19 has upturned all of our worlds, that this type of disruption can also be viewed as an opportunity. So one of the things that we're seeing as a result of COVID-19 and sheltering in place is that there's less driving and fewer cars on the road and more people walking and bicycling outside. So this is a perfect time to think about how we can better accommodate bikes and peds on the street now and into the future. But how are we going to accommodate bikes and peds and maintain social distancing when many of our streets effectively look like this for bicyclists and pedestrians? Not a whole lot of space, not a whole lot of space on the sidewalks, crosswalks, or for bicyclists. So one solution is to redesign the street, at least temporarily, to accommodate these needs. So I'm going to talk about 3 types of temporary streets and just give you a brief description of what they are. Rich is going to go into more detail about the design and some of the materials later on in the presentation. So the first type of temporary street that we're going to talk about is our street demonstrations. And street demonstrations are the shortest in duration of the temporary streets that we're going to talk about today. They're really meant to be up for anywhere from a day to a month-long period of time. And they're a good way to test out a new design, or maybe a design that may be viewed as controversial in the community in a very quick and inexpensive method. So they're really fast to install. We did this one in Seaside from the start of planning to implementation within a couple of months. And we used more expensive materials than needed, but you can use paint, temporary tape, temporary signage, and still make it look really nice. And one of the applications that we found has worked really well for these street demonstrations is to include them as part of a planning process. So we did this one as part of a Safe Routes to School plan, and we did it after we had our draft list of recommended street improvements. And this was a really powerful way to engage the community in the planning process and get their opinion about this design by letting them physically walk and bike through it. And we had this one up for a 2-week time period. The second type of temporary streets we're going to talk about today are slow streets. And these are a direct response to COVID-19 and the need for communities to provide that extra space for people to walk and bike in their neighborhoods. So these are being implemented. This is a picture in San Francisco, and they have a wonderful slow streets program. So I highly recommend visiting their website after the webinar. But they are focusing on neighborhood streets, low volume streets, and they are closing these streets to through vehicle traffic while maintaining parking on the street. So they're not taking away any parking. And this has been a very popular program in San Francisco. So, and in terms of duration, they're planning to keep it up through as long as they need to, as long as necessary to respond to COVID-19. And they're using very inexpensive materials, so they've been able to implement very quickly. And lastly, the quick build projects. These are designed to be up for at least 2 years, and they have come about in response to Vision Zero and the desire to to get some of these safety improvements up for bicyclists and pedestrians sooner rather than later to save lives. These tend to be a little bit more expensive than the other two options because they're meant to be out on the street for longer, and they do have a higher cost in terms of maintaining them. But Rich will get into that a little bit later. And but they definitely have more of a safety benefit than the other two as well. So the main components for all of these temporary projects are listed here. And I think the main message is that these temporary projects, they're not just dumping paint or cones on a street or some barricades and then calling it good and leaving. These, in order to be successful and safe, they need to be really well thought out, planned, require a dedicated team of people who are working on this. I highly recommend engineers working with your planners to find the best sites and to also help with community engagement. But ultimately, these types of projects start with political will or even policy. And I have included an example of a policy, a quick build policy from San Francisco in the resources at the end of the slide. Oh.
I'll let you know when I'm out.
Can you please?
Ariana, I muted everyone, but I wasn't able to unmute you.
Thank you, Debbie. So I was saying, it starts with policy or political will. It also takes a team of, I recommend planner, engineer, and some sort of person who's in charge of communications for the city. Well, it's also important to have a plan for installing the project, but also some screening criteria for where you're going to put these if you're going to do, especially if you're going to do more than one, and have an actual formal program. And then funding, identifying a source of funding. Typically, these are funded through using local funds, but we're going to talk about some other opportunities at the end of the presentation. Other opportunities for funding. And then I think that it's also really important to have a community engagement strategy before the project, letting the community know that it's coming, especially the people who are going to be directly impacted by the project, but then also during the installation or during the project, engaging the community to actually use the project, to actually walk and bike. So that's what's pictured here. We held a bike and walk to school day event with one of the schools that we worked with on our street demonstration project, so that to encourage people to use the street in a different way than just driving through it. And then it's also important to have a maintenance plan, because these are temporary and are using temporary materials. They do require regular maintenance and regular monitoring to make sure that it's remains safe. And then I think that that most importantly, the most important component, I think, is data collection, collecting data on how the temporary projects is being used. If you do actually see behavior change, more people walking or biking, if you do see reduction of collisions or other safety benefits, it's important to collect that information and document it. And then also provide an opportunity for the community to give feedback. So we used a survey, a community opinion survey for this project, to find out, to ask people if they wanted to see the project made permanent. And those sorts of that data is really, really powerful in presenting the results and findings to decision makers, and in the final assessment of the project, and determining whether or not the jurisdiction wants to put in more resources to make the improvement permanent. Okay, my screen froze again. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So another consideration for when if you're doing a temporary demonstration or project is to think about adding a non-infrastructure programming component and piloting a program. That's what we did with our Safe Routes to School street demonstration, was that we, in addition to redesigning the street for a short period of time, we also encouraged parents to park and walk with their children to school instead of driving all the way to the front of school through the drop-off circle. So this is a communications piece that we put together and we distributed to the school and to the parents, identifying those park and walk spots and showing that they would actually save time by walking instead of driving. We also provided a crossing guard at the new crosswalk that we installed, the temporary crosswalk we installed, just to make sure that that felt really safe for people to use. And the result of these communication pieces, this programming and the temporary infrastructure resulted in a 65% increase in walking during the morning drop-off period. So I think in particular, when you're doing Safe Routes to School projects, these non-infrastructure programming can really make a big impact. So some of the pros and cons of temporary streets. Is faster always better? No, not necessarily, and they don't work on every street. But quick build projects, street demonstrations, and safe streets can really have some powerful benefits. I mean, just the fact that they can be installed more quickly than permanent installations can save more lives. So if that's the goal, then focusing resources on high collision corridors can really maximize that benefit. It's also an opportunity to complete networks, bicycle and pedestrian networks. So maybe you already have some good infrastructure, but you're just missing that key connection. This is an easy way or less expensive way to make those connections work. And then, as I talked about before, collecting data on these streets is really powerful, especially if the intent is to make these improvements permanent, because that data can be used in grant applications or for justification to decision makers to invest in these improvements. And then the cons are that these temporary streets do take resources. They do take resources and they do take planning, they do take staff time, and they can be high maintenance because of the materials that are used. And not all designs are suitable for a temporary project, and because in large part due to restrictions due to the existing right-of-way. And Rich is going to get into some of that in just a minute. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Rich Steele, our engineer extraordinaire. Rich, are you there?
Rich, let me unmute you. There you go.
Thank you, Debbie. You're very kind. It's hard to do, the charades with slides. I want to go through the specific details, especially surrounding this street demonstration we did in Seaside that Ari has already shown you slides on. This is the existing street. It's a 4-lane road, parking both sides, and the driveway you're looking at on the right is the entry to the school drop-off, the dreaded school drop-off. And you can see from the stop ahead sign downstream, there's an always stop, multi-lane always stop that didn't really work that good to begin with. So we've got a lot of real estate, and the choice that we had to make is, what do we sacrifice to bring in really great, not just average, but really great bike facilities and ped facilities? So there's a couple principles we worked on. Number one, we wanted the bikes to be buffered. We wanted a buffered bike lane separating traffic from the bike traffic. And we wanted, where we're going to put in a crosswalk, we wanted to shorten the length of the crossing to minimize the exposure crossing the street, which means that we have a whole bunch of stuff that we put in the road on a temporary basis. And the next slide will show you all the striping and stuff that we put on there. So let's take a quick look if Ari will forward that one. There we go. Okay, so what you're seeing is the bike lane against the curb, separate from the sidewalk. We have a 4-foot buffer area with these funky plastic wave things. They're flexible plastic that are very crash worthy. Next to that is floating parking. So we push the parking for the school out past the bike lane. This floating parking worked because we didn't have any driveways interrupting the floating parking. And you can imagine, if you have driveways interrupting your parking, then you have visibility issues for folks exiting the driveway that need to look left to see conflicting traffic. So this worked really well. Also gave us a nice buffer for vehicle traffic and helped keep the speeds a little bit slower. What you'll see is a whole bunch of temporary striping tape. Let's go back one. You see a whole bunch of temporary striping tape. All of the striping we put down is it's basically the 4-inch reflective temporary striping tape you would use in construction. So it's all standard stuff. What I want to point out is none of this violated the MUTCD. So for those folks who are a little bit worried about standards, don't violate your standards. Stick to your standards and make it work. It does function really, really well. We did have to put up some temporary signs. You can see the barricade there, and you can see the yellow crosswalk. We'll go into that in a little bit. But the purple we put down is actually a tempera paint, so it's water soluble. When you put it on asphalt, it doesn't really rinse off with a hose. You have to power wash it to get it off. So just so you know, there's going to be a little extra work to get it off of there, but it is fairly friendly. You can vacuum it up. It's not that big a deal. Yes, for you MUTC folks, purple is reserved for toll roads, but in this case, we wanted something that stood out, gave us a nice contrast, and looked really great with the green bike lane. So that's what we got. So let's go to the next slide. So we used the City of Seaside crews to do all the layout. We had an engineering drawing, and when we did the field layout, we actually made a few modifications to make this all work. One of the important things in doing a crosswalk is you absolutely have to have ADA compliance. So we didn't want to rip up the curb and put in standard ADA ramps. So we actually built them up with asphalt with a wood platform that gave us the correct grades that went from the sidewalk down into what used to be the parking area. And there you can kind of see how that ramp lays out there. It's just cold mix asphalt, temporary, it's no big deal. The yellow stripes for the crosswalks are temporary striping tape. The yellow bars in the middle were tempera paint. I would probably use the reflective ones because it's better, but we had the tempera paint. You can see the purple island in the middle. We actually outlined that with the yellow temporary tape. And we used this scenario to create an offset crosswalk so that it gives students crossing the street a shorter crosswalks, and they're looking at one conflicting movement at a time coming from the left. And because we shrunk it from from a 4-lane road to a 2-lane road, the interaction was much more positive, because you don't have that problem with multi-lane threat for a pedestrian crossing an uncontrolled crosswalk. We got great compliance on this. We did add a crossing guard just because we wanted to add emphasis to this thing, and that was really, really successful, because it made the parents feel really comfortable that their kids could actually walk to school and cross the street. Let's go to the next slide. So this is, we used the purple to create curb extensions and shrink the radius of the curb return. And you can see we use those funky plastic wave things. Those are non-standard. You can use standard temporary traffic control stuff. We want to use something that was more decorative. We could have used a whole bunch of delineators or cones or whatever, and we just wanted to try something a little bit different. But the effect that you can see is really dramatic, because it shrinks the width of that crosswalk. I think we shaved off more than 20 feet on the crossing on the left, which was really terrific. And this worked great. One of the nice things about having a curb extension is when the pedestrian goes out into that purple area, the driver who's approaching the stop sign has a better visual interaction with the pedestrian. So the driver and the pedestrian actually see each other, and it's a far safer condition than walking from where the existing ramp is up into that crosswalk, hoping that the driver will see him and choose to stop. This one it demands the driver stop in a more proactive way. So really good treatment. Let's go to the next one. So this is pushing the transit island out. So the transit stop is on the left side of the bike lane. So it takes away the problem of having a bike lane that runs next to a transit stop, because the transit vehicle is big. They got to get in, out of the stop, and this does a nice job of separating that. This is in San Francisco, and one of the things you can see is they put in concrete. So they put in the concrete nose, they put in the standard ADA ramps, they put in the crossings, they put in the curb with the rail to give good separation between folks waiting on the transit platform and bike riders. And this is really nice because it gives a vertical separation between the bike riders and the pedestrians. So lots of great separation here. One of the things to highlight here is the nose of this transit island has some striping leading up to it, and a warning sign. I think the warning sign is supposed to have everything going diagonally. Well, anyways, the basic idea is to shadow the transit island, so you have a nice buffer that gets drivers aligned correctly going toward it, and not have a transition that ends right at the nose of the island. So this is a great treatment. I really like this one. Let's take a look at the next one. This is a pretty slick treatment, just reminding people to social distance. But what it kind of highlights is, if your sidewalk is 5 feet wide, then you're never going to be able to accommodate this. So using some of that street space to make it, to separate everything out and make things a little better is really a smart way to do it. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a graphic from the NACTO pandemic guidelines that just came out, and I really like them. I think they did a fantastic job of graphically showing how you can actually create outdoor space by taking some of that real estate. In this case, they took the parking. You could take the whole street, half the street. there's a lot of options here. But in essence, making the street environment work for you to give you the really great social distancing and some economic vitality. So giving the restaurants half a shot to expand their service out into the street area without getting stuck with, you know, 1/3 of the tables that they used to serve inside their restaurant. So it's a really, really nice way to do something different with the street. There are some critical pieces that go with this, and this is kind of a simple diagram, but I want to kind of point them out as we go. Number one, if you've got a 2-lane approach to a road like this where you're shrinking it down, you have to drop that lane before you get across the intersection. If you've got a dual left turn lane, you're going to have to drop one of those. You have to, you know, barricade off one of those lanes so you only have a single left, which gets you into the traffic engineering nightmare of choosing where you want your congestion. And what I want to kind of give you the thought of is you should never waste a good pandemic. Bringing in some economic vitality and doing something creative is a really, really good thing. So maybe accepting a little congestion in a smart way is a really good thing on a temporary basis. So think about the opportunities you may have in your downtown. Maybe there's a block you want to close, and maybe there's one you want to do as a one-way street, maybe, you know, with a single lane. Maybe there's one where you do half a street. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, and the NACTO guide does a good job of kind of giving you samples of what you can do. What I would encourage you to do, though, is where you have the approach side of these closures where you're doing outdoor seating, you really want to do more substantial barriers. So you can do the water-filled plastic barriers on the leading edge, do really good lighting on this thing if you're going to have these things open, you know, at night, and just go back to the really basic temporary traffic control that is so important, so that drivers know what's going on when this thing has a big change. And I think at this point we should probably take some questions before we get toward the end, because some of these things will have issues that we should kind of use the diagram on. So do we have questions, Debbie, that you want to read?
I do have a couple of questions. They were related to a little more generic thing. So first of all, the quick build projects are the temporary projects that we've done in Seaside and other places. Is there a plan to actually implement them as either quick build or permanent projects? And I think I'll give that one to Ariana in regards to the Broadway project.
Yeah, so we are actually in the process of working with the city of Seaside to apply for this upcoming cycle of active transportation program funding, which comes from the state, to make those improvements permanent and actually expand the project for a few more blocks. So and we are going to use all of the data we collected during our demonstration and include it as part of our grant application.
Fantastic. The other question that I have here is for Rich. Let's see. Are there any plans for quick build or temporary roundabouts? I was very curious about that myself.
You know, there's some really good guidance in the roundabout design guide for temporary roundabouts, and there's been some successful ones that have been used for temporary traffic control. And although we haven't tried it yet, it looks like a really effective way to take a multi-lane all-way stop that has tons of space in the intersection and put in a single lane roundabout, so that it shrinks the speed at the intersection. It shrinks the speed dramatically entering whatever street they're discharging on. So it can be a really effective tool to move traffic really smoothly. The nice thing about roundabouts are, especially single lane roundabouts in this kind of a setting, is you're not worried about queues as much because they discharge queues really well. traffic flow in the roundabouts are usually the capacity is a lot higher than a traffic signal. So I'm actually looking for an opportunity to do a temporary roundabout because I think they would be really great. Again, it's going to be really important to make sure that you have a vertical component in the central island so that the roundabout isn't surprising people on the on entry, because it needs to function really, really well. So also pay attention to the length of your splitter islands in that temporary condition so that you can drop speeds before you get to the intersection and make sure that thing has a real high degree of success.
Okay, well, I know we could definitely use a test of that in Capitola. So I'll talk to you about that. So let's see, I have a question from someone wants to know where did we get the plastic wave fence used in the Seaside project?
That's definitely an Ari question.
Ariana, is that something you know off the top of your head, or is that something we should get back to Mr. Tom Riley about? Where we got the wave delineators.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. I actually included a link to the wave delineators in our resources slide. So they're made by Saris, and yeah, that's all there.
So feel free to take a screenshot when we get to the end, so you can document that.
Yeah.
All right, should we keep going forward? Let's go to the next slide.
Sounds good.
So this is in Milan. And they expanded their sidewalk by actually creating additional walking space where the parking was, and then putting the bike lane next to that. And you can see they have a really nice buffer next to vehicle traffic. I really, really like this treatment because it just expands all that space without having to confine the people that are walking and biking. So really great job over there. Let's go to the next one. So this is one of my favorite photos. This is in Hilo, Hawaii. And what I want to point out is if you're looking for something that's hands-free, there's a ped push button at flip-flop height. So you can just kick the button while you're waiting to cross the street at the signal. You know, no hand sanitizer necessary. And it's actually a really fun treatment that the local traffic engineers used that fits the population really, really well. So this is kind of a cool option for pandemic things. You may not want to do it at every single signal, but there might be some high volume crossings that, you know, you kind of want to do something different at. I think it's very creative. Let's go to the next one. So here's a bunch of the materials. A lot of this stuff you already have in your city yards or county yards, and you can bring it out because a lot of it is basic temporary traffic control equipment. Where the expense gets a little higher is where you have to do the temporary ADA ramps. So you will need some asphalt, might have to build a ramp, a wood ramp that actually meets the grades correctly. The temporary tape can get expensive. I think it's uppers of $1 a foot for the 4-inch tape. You can get it wider. But the temporary tape is, I think it's just really unsurpassed in doing a temporary road thing. You can use regular paint, but then you got to grind it off. The nice thing about the reflective tape is it's so reflective, you don't have to put down reflective markers with it, and that helps a lot. If you're doing a change to your street where your temporary treatment, your temporary striping is not going over the top of an existing lane line, you will have a conflict in markings. So you're going to have to deal with that, whether it's black tempera paint or removing the markings or temporary black construction tape over the top of it. It's really important to make sure that the temporary markings really stand out clean and bright. Those were kind of the bigger cost items. You will want changeable message signs to give drivers a really prominent warning before they reach that change in your street. So, you know, do all the stuff that's really smart with temporary traffic control. And again, barriers are going to be really important. You know, there was probably a decade or so ago an issue with a car driving down one of the pedestrian malls in Santa Monica and killing some people. And it's just really important to be smart about how you protect the entry points of your slow streets or your demos. So don't ignore the barriers. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, I think this is my slide. Yeah, so for those of you who are interested in implementing a temporary street or quick build project in your community, there are several different sources of funding for these, to do these. Probably the most common is local funding. So if a jurisdiction has access to sales tax money, or a good way to do these is actually to incorporate them into your regular roadway maintenance projects. So whenever you're resurfacing or restriping a roadway, that's an opportunity to redesign the street, and in a pretty cost-effective way. So so that's an opportunity where maybe planners and engineers can get together and focus on those high collision streets and align these projects with their maintenance plans. Another potential source of funding is regional funding through the regional transportation planning agencies, or sales tax money. And then lastly, a new source of upcoming source of funding in California is the Active Transportation Program, they're doing a quick build pilot through cycle 5 of their grant. So this will be funding, they'll be available fiscal years 2021-22 through 2024-25. These applications are due July 15th, so it's coming right up. But the application, for those of you who are familiar with the Active Transportation Program, the quick build applications are less intense than the normal applications. So if you're interested, and for those of you who are tuning in from Monterey County or the Monterey Bay area, feel free to reach out to me, and we can help you out with those applications. And then lastly, here's a slide with some resources on quick build projects, the Active Transportation Program Cycle 5 grant link, the NACDO. NACDO has a guide for quick build projects, but they also have a really great guide for streets for pandemic response and recovery, which Rich mentioned before, and they have a lot of really good concept designs in that. And then I also included some resources for quick build resolutions, and the city of Riverside just came out with a temporary outdoor flex space permit for their restaurants, so that might be applicable if your community is interested in expanding into the street to allow for more outdoor dining to support local restaurants and the local economy. And then I also included a link to the Go Human toolbox. Go Human is a street safety campaign down in Southern California, and they have some really cool tools and messaging, and so I provided that as well. And that's it for us. So we'll be happy to answer more questions.